am live. Oh, it is Monday, the 31st of July, and it's raining again, 2023. I'm reading out of Mind, Time Out of Mind. It is the autobiography of Joan Grant. She was a seer. She used to write books about her far memories, about her previous incarnations. Her most famous one is probably Winged Pharaoh, which played in the ancient Egypt pre-flood. It was a fascinating book. Life as Carola is another very good one from the early 16th century. And this book was written and published, well, it's published 1956. I dare say she wrote this through parts of her life, about how and why and how it came to be that she could do this. Yeah, many people are now experiencing visions of reincarnations and so on, and I think it's very appropriate to read it. I myself am enjoying it. I read it over a decade ago, but things take a different perspective, don't they, in the last couple of years. We are now in the third part of this book, chapter 5, Coffee FAZENDA. After a second night in the excellent hotel, we left Sao Paulo at daybreak, for Martinez wanted to cover as much distance as possible before the noon heat. Distance, the distance of range after range of rounded hills smooth under their green pelt of forest. Blue distance of the high Sierras, a distant glimpse of the road ahead of us, a red thread in the cacophony of green, is all I remember of that journey. There had been distance of a kind in the Argentine. An emptiness like a grey future stared at dumbly across a slough of despond. But here, distance was an exuberance, a challenge, a renewal of wonder, beauty untamed and beguiling as the moods of the sea. We had the road to ourselves except for an occasional ox cart, and Martinez drove so fast that although we had a siesta in an adobe village, we reached the Fazenda Campo Alto before sunset. Centuries had mellowed the pantios that roofed the great white house until they seemed as much a natural growth as the trumpet vines, the surge of bougainvillea which splashed the ancient walls with riotous colour, spangled with hummingbirds. Lawns smooth as an English bowling green flowed down to the lake. "You like my lake?" said Martinez. "I made it 3 years ago. One morning I said to myself, there is still something lacking in the view. What is it, Martinez?" And then the answer came to me. My hills, the avenues which my father planted, would look even better if they were reflected in water. So I built a dam, and now there is 3 miles of water for my home to look at. What joy it was to be there. After La Carlina, when no one bothered to make a room less ugly or plant a flower. The pretty little lady who brought coffee to our room next morning gave me a note. "We have all gone out riding, but I thought you might wish to sleep late. Breakfast is at 9, but tell the maid if you would prefer to have it upstairs. Love, C." I decided to let Leslie sleep while I went for a swim in the lake. House servants were polishing the floors, filling flower vases, singing softly as they worked, pausing to nod and smile as I passed. The air was more scented even than Hurtwood in the season of azaleas. A toucan, its yellow beak absurdly large for its raven's body, clattered from a clump of poinsettia bushes in their full scarlet. A flock of green parakeets skimmed low overhead. On the far side of the blue water, a cart, drawn by a span of white oxen, creaked along an avenue of giant palms. I came to a wooden pier, where 2 rowing boats and another with the furled orange sails were bobbing at their moorings on a slight ripple. There was no one about, and I was out of sight of the house. It would be ridiculous to put on a stretchy woolen bathing suit, so leaving it with my towel and dressing gown at the end of the pier, I climbed down a ladder into water smooth as sun-warmed silk. I swam lazily for a couple of 100 yards and then floated, baking in the early sunlight. The stillness was cracked by the sound of a galloping horse, a dull thudding as it crossed the lawn, and then the clatter of roofs on the planks of the pier. "Joan, Come back at once, quickly. Martinez's voice was so peremptory that I was startled and rather annoyed. So I was late for breakfast, was I? Why should that make him cross? Or were Brazilians even more morose than Scots in the early morning? I saw him jump into one of the boats and start rowing towards me. Rowing very badly, too, for he was splashing the water with oars. I tried to swim faster. How infuriating to be fetched by Martinez, as though he were a nanny and I a silly child in danger of drowning. He reached me before I was more than halfway to the pier, leaped over the side and handed me unceremoniously into the boat. Hauled me into the boat. Dripping and resentful, I tried to look nonchalant, having suddenly realized I was stark naked. He pulled out his handkerchief and mopped the sweat on his forehead. Joan, please do not give me any more such shocks. I do not like shocks, especially before breakfast. I'm sorry I've offended you, I said stiffly. It never occurred to me that you would come here on horseback. If you had walked down from the house to tell me that I'm late for breakfast, I should have seen you in time to put on some clothes. Then he laughed until he nearly fell backwards off the boat. My dear, sweet Joan, I adore you being naked, and no one needs ever be punctual in my house. Then why all the fuss? Because we never bathe in the lake. We bathe in the swimming pool. In the lake there are alligators. After breakfast he showed me round the house. The furniture was superb, much of it brought from Portugal by his family in the 17th century. In one room there was a leather runner on the polished floor. I wondered whether it was a native work or an unusual kind of Cordoba leather, such as I had seen on the walls of his library. Oh, that, he said casually, it's an anaconda skin, an unusually fine one. It's 36 feet long and 6 feet wide. I gulped. I suppose it came from the Amazon? He pointed out of the window. I shot it on the lawn, but too late to stop it swallowing one of my pedigree calves. It had chased the poor beast out of the stockyard. The calf hadn't got a chance, of course, for a large anaconda is supposed to be able to catch a galloping horse. I dare say I looked scared, for he put his arm around my shoulders and gave me a friendly hug. You must not be afraid of Brazil, Joanne. She is a good country to people who love her. Everywhere there are dangers. Think of the waves in the Bay of Biscay, the taxis in Paris. But when you go on a ship, you do not expect to be drowned, nor run over when you cross the street on the way to Maxim's. Do I worry? No, but I do not shut my eyes. My people, over 500 of them, many the descendants of slaves brought from Africa by my ancestors, are happy with me. But I do not pretend that there are no bad men amongst them, nor that those who come asking that they can work for me are all angels. There are bad men as there are bad horses, so it would be silly of me not to carry a revolver when I go far from the house. Last year my nephew was here and he refused to go armed when I sent him to pay the wages. One of the coffee pickers, he was not born here, but had been with us 4 years, was tempted by the sight of so many coins, so he killed my nephew. Did the police catch the murderer? No, he ran away. There are no police here. What would be the use of a policeman when there are thousands of square miles of forest in which a criminal can hide? The fazenda was virtually self-supporting, for although the main crop was coffee, nearly every other staple was grown and flourished with almost incredible exuberance. Wheat, rice, maize, every kind of fruit and vegetable, cotton, which was woven and dyed in brilliant colors for the clothes, wool for their ponchos, cattle, sleek as racehorses, munched lush alfalfa in yards knee-deep in glossy yellow straw. They were kept not only for meat and milk, butter and cheese, but for their hides, for lariats and sandals, for saddles and reins and whips. These were the days before the coffee slump. Mile after mile of bushes, the berries brilliant as scarlet cherries among the barrel-like leaves, being gathered into baskets, taken by an ox cart to the drying floors. There were orchards of oranges and tangerines, grapefruit and lemons. But orchards which made the orange trees I had seen in the south of France look like bushes, dwarfed it for planting in tubs. For under these trees one could ride and have to stand in the stirrups to pull fruit from the lowest branch. Their way of life seemed familiar, although it was 15 years before I was to recognize how closely it resembled the pattern of responsibility natural to a Nomarch of the middle dynasties of Egypt. A good landowner was as much an integral part of his people as his head was part of his body. Neither could survive without the other, neither resented it was from the head the orders came, which were carried out by the hands. Money was neither a bloated nor a hungry monster lurking in the ledger. It was only the oil on the wheels, which kept smooth the interchange of life, life which grew out of the earth with life which grew out of people. Growth was everywhere abundant. The earth goddess almost too prodigal. A forest path vanished if it were neglected even for a month. A branch of Benonia, which had been touching my windowsill when I arrived, reached across the corner of the room in a fortnight. I had asked for it to be allowed to grow unchecked, so I could watch the hummingbirds darting in and out of the flowers while I was lying in bed. Martinez worked hard, but he still had boundless energy for enjoyment. Guests seldom announced, except by the sound of a motor horn, for there was no telephone and everyone had better things to do than write letters, flowed into the house. They swam in his swimming pool, sailed his boat, rode his horses. We danced muchachas, clasped chest to chest to the rhythm of maracas, or lay in long chairs on the patio listening to the people singing, 40, 50, 60 men and women voices rich and soft as velvet, love songs and songs, sad songs, old songs, to the ripple of guitars. Nearly every day there was a new face at the long refectory. People where upwards of 20 dishes were set, from which we all helped ourselves, although a footman stood beside each chair to change the plates. The talk was varied and plentiful as the food, new ideas to savour and digest, entrees of wit, delicious soufflés of chatter. Sex took her place in the conversation too. A goddess enthroned, a shepherdess pursued. To us both it was very comforting to find that other people also thought sex was gay, fun. Leslie, never at his brightest in the morning, sometimes found it difficult to appreciate jokes considered suitable for bridegrooms at breakfast. He realized it was only Brazilian good manners for the men to pay me fulsome compliments, but sometimes they worried him a little, which impelled them to tease him. Leslie, my friend, I must warn you that I have fallen in love with Joan's knees, said Martinez, pretending to be quite serious. The rest of her is as good too, of course, but I'm connoisseurs of knees, and hers are irresistible, so never must she allow herself to be alone with me. When we were dressing for dinner, Leslie looked searchingly at my knees. I can't see anything odd about them myself, he said thoughtfully. A bit knobbly, if anything, but for heaven's sake, Joan, be careful with a chap. One's never quite sure with foreigners, and if he tried anything on you, I don't know what I ought to do. I would be so jolly awkward that I think we would have to leave. I knew very well that Martinez had only been joking, but there was a day when I briefly harboured unworthy doubts. We were all out riding, and he and I somewhat got separated from the others. The horses were plodding placidly along, and he had been flicking high branches with the lash of his whip to make the great butterflies open their wings, so that I could see their glistening blueness. Something swung down out of the shadows. As I was only a bat, simultaneously Martinez lashed my horse across the quarters and sent it careering off down the forest track. I was so startled that I lost both stirrups and had to cling to the pommel of the saddle. I heard his horse galloping after me, but mine only went faster. I was frightened and angry. If this was a Brazilian prelude to seduction in the tropic glade, Martinez had got his lines crossed. Was he conceited enough to think I enjoyed playing nymphs and shepherds on horseback, especially when I was about to fall off the horse? By some equine whim, the animal to which I was clinging suddenly dived into a tunnel in the undergrowth, where the dead leaves underfoot were so thick and the bushes beside the tracks so impenetrable that the sound of pursuit was cut off. My horse came to a steep gully and halted, so suddenly, throwing up its silly head, that the hocked mane hit me full in the face. Even a willing nymph, and I was not at all willing, would have been displeased if, during her flight from dishonour, fate had suddenly smacked her across the face with the equivalent of a scrubbing brush. I hid until I looked a little more presentable, and the horse eventually found its way and mine back to the house, after it had loitered in an orchard for an hour where it insisted on being fed with oranges. Martinez was most apologetic that the horse had bolted with me. I think it had never occurred to him that anyone could fail to control such a well-trained animal. He had been looking for me all the afternoon to explain what had really happened. The thing which he had swung down from the tree was a tarantula, which, if Martinez had not thought quickly enough, and so made my horse get me out of the way, would probably have bitten me. Having escaped one tarantula, it was bad luck to find an enormous one glaring at me from the wall when I was having a bath that same evening before dinner. Its green eyes glittered. Its hairy body swayed from side to side as it poised itself under a dreadful hairy legs. "Help!" I shouted. "Quick, help!" The old butler happened to be passing the door. He rushed in, and although the sight of the tarantula made him go mauve with terror, he lashed at it with a bath towel while he was scuttling round the floor, hit it with a salver he was carrying, and then finished it off by covering it with the cork bath mat, on which he jumped up and down until there was no chance of there being a twitch left in it. I was so overwhelmed with gratitude that I leapt out of the bath and hugged him. Leslie came in at that moment. The butler hastily withdrew, and my husband, instead of being thankful that his bride had been spared an agonizing death, briskly rebuked me for letting myself be seen naked by a butler. We went to bed fairly early, after one of the evening strolls round the garden, which I enjoyed less than I had done before. I discovered that the reason everyone put on riding boots before going out of the house after sundown was against snakes, not mosquitoes. I made Leslie strip the bed and hunt behind cupboards in case there were any more tarantulas lurking there, until he grew rather fretful, which was unfair of him, as I always put moths, which he loathes, carefully out of the window, and do similar willing service for bats and non-poisonous spiders. It got hotter and hotter, and neither of us could sleep. A species of mosquitoes just small enough to get through the mesh of the net appeared in swarms to feed on me. Mosquitoes and fleas seldom bite anyone else if I'm available. Leslie drowsed off several times, but I had to wake him because the gorged mosquito clustered on the ceiling of our four-poster bed, and I was not quite tall enough to reach them. About 2 a.m, he said wearily, "If I took you for a swim, do you think it might make you cool enough to stop scratching?" I accepted this overture gladly, and we let ourselves out of a side door and went to the swimming pool by a white cement path on which even a small centipede could have been clearly visible in the brilliant moonlight. The swimming pool was tiled and surrounded by a high wall which cast such a deep shadow that half the water looked like a pool of ink. Leslie, who is an exceedingly good swimmer and dives with real pleasure, amused himself by going in several times from the highest board. Then he said at the end of it, smoking a cigarette, I was swimming about quite happily and beginning to think I was nearly cool enough to go back to bed, when suddenly something cold and slippery attacked me. Desperately I fought it off, yelling to Leslie for rescue. Hours passed in what may have been seconds. I heard a sound more dreadful even than my screams. Leslie was laughing. I was not only being killed by an anaconda, I was dying under the very eyes of a man who I thought was a kindly husband, but who was now revealed as a sadistic maniac. My head went under. Now I was too full of water even to scream. Oh God, let me drown before I'm swallowed. Now the enormous serpent had got me by the hair. It's going to swallow me head first. But it was Leslie, not the snake, who hauled me out of the water. He was still shaking with laughter, but trying to sound contrite. Darling, I didn't realize you had really panicked, or I would have pulled you out sooner. I was sobbing with fury. You monstrous travesty of a husband. I hope the anaconda eats you alive. What anaconda? Run, you fool, run, it will catch us both in a minute. He patted me in that awful way which husbands have when they think their wives are being hysterical. Take a grip on yourself, Joan. Your anaconda is only a rubber horse. But at last we had to leave to catch the boat to England. Martinez and Clotilde insisted on taking us to Sao Paulo, although it was the height of the coffee harvest. And we could have easily have got a lift in one of the other guests' cars. The least we could do was to be their host at a farewell party, which was a good one, and left us about 10 shillings after paying our night's hotel bill. Luckily, we had return tickets on the railway, and the steamship tickets would be waiting for us in charge of the purser when we got on board. A.D. having arranged this instead of giving them to Leslie, so as to make sure there was no further delay in his getting back to England to work for him and for his bar exams. Several Brazilians from the hotel were going on the same boat, which called at Rio de Janeiro, and they all took the morning train. However, Leslie discovered that there was another train leaving at 3, which would have given us about half an hour at Santos to catch the Alcantara. We lunched early at 1:30, and an hour later I began to look pointedly at my watch. At 20 to 3, I suggested that it was time to make a move. Plenty of time for more coffee, said Leslie. For the last time I filled a cup to the brim with a pale fawn Brazilian sugar, which is ground so fine that it instantly dissolves and produces the apparent impossibility that a cupful of coffee and another of sugar are both contained in one cup. I knew that you could not really be English. It is now proved that you were both born in Brazil, for you could never have caught a boat to bring you here, declared Martinez. Dared I go to see the luggage into a taxi? No, that might be thought bossy. At 5 minutes to 3, Leslie rose leisurely from the table. Martinez and Clotilde assured us that it was now too late to go to the station, but agreed to call there as it was on the way to the garage where their car was being serviced. The taxi driver entered into the spirit of the game and rocked past Crossroad with his thumb on the horn. The station clock announced it was 10 minutes past 3, but the engine driver, like Leslie, refused to be bullied by clocks, and we leapt into the moving train just before it drew away from the platform. You nearly did me out of my last real cup of coffee, said Leslie reproachfully. I was panting too hard to reply. This is the end of chapter 5, and they are back on their way to England. Have a lovely Monday.